There's a poster, right now, somewhere in a box in your garage, or taped to the inside of an old closet you haven't opened since Clinton was president. A white Lamborghini Countach, maybe a black Buick Grand National, maybe a red Ferrari Testarossa. And here's what's weird. You can still hear the engine. Not because you ever drove one, because you never did. And that's exactly why it's stuck. My name's Frank, and I want to talk about a specific type of Gen Xer, you. And right now, you're sitting there doing that half smile because you know exactly which poster was on your wall. I've gone through thousands of forum posts, auction records, insurance data, and social media threads about this exact thing. And what showed up is a pattern, a reason your brain locked onto those cars like a homing signal and never let go. And that reason has nothing to do with being a car guy. It goes deeper than that. So, the year is, let's say, 1975. You're somewhere between 7 and 12. The golden age of American muscle, which really only lasted from 1964 to 1971, was already dead. After that, all those once mighty street machines got choked down into weaker versions of what they used to be. The government hit car makers with emissions rules, insurance companies jacked up rates, and gas prices went through the roof after the oil crisis. So what happened? Your dad, or your uncle, or the cool neighbor 3 houses down, he had one of those old beasts sitting in the driveway. A 69 Camaro SS, a 70 Chevelle, maybe a Dodge Charger, and it just sat there. Couldn't afford to feed it, couldn't afford to insure it. But he'd still go out on Saturday and pop the hood and just stare at it like it owed him money. And you stood right next to him. You didn't know what a carburetor was. Didn't matter. You knew that thing was special because of the way he looked at it. That was your first lesson. You didn't learn to love these cars from a magazine. You learned it from someone else's pain of not being able to drive one. And that's a different kind of love. You weren't sold on it. You inherited it, like a song stuck in your head that was playing before you were born. Then television sealed the deal. Many Gen Xers grew up idolizing the classic muscle cars they saw on TV shows, movies, and on the streets. Most kids brought up in the 1970s wanted either a Dodge Charger, like the General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard, or Burt Reynolds' Screaming Chicken Trans Am from Smokey and the Bandit. You watched that orange Charger fly over a creek bed every Friday night and thought, that's what freedom looks like. Not a plane ticket, not a promotion, a car, with a loud engine and no seatbelt laws. Now, here's where the wiring happened in your brain. You connected cool car with excitement before you even hit puberty. That's not a hobby, that's a hardwired emotional response. And it got reinforced every single week by Hollywood. So by the time you turned 16, you already had a wish list. But you couldn't buy the wish list. Those old muscle cars? Too expensive to maintain, too thirsty for gas, which means your generation had to find something else. When Gen X hit the driving age in the 1980s, there was a whole new set of cool cars coming out of Detroit that fit the decade. And the king of that kingdom? The Fox Body Mustang. The Fox Body Mustang GT dragged muscle cars back into the cool zone in the 80s. It offered affordable V8 power, endless modification options from street racers to drag strip monsters, and a shape that now oozes retro charm. The sound of its 5.0-liter V8 became a street anthem. It was the ultimate my first fast car for a generation of enthusiasts. You could actually afford one. Maybe not brand new, but used, 2, 3 grand, a summer job and a half, done. And suddenly you're in a parking lot, revving a V8 at 17 years old, feeling like Burt Reynolds' cooler, younger brother. But the Fox Body wasn't the only player. There was the Chevy Camaro IROC-Z, the Pontiac Firebird, and then there was the one car that broke every rule, the Buick Grand National. The Buick Grand National gave obtainable hope to young boys as they could see them cruising the streets of their hometowns. It was a time when horsepower was being discouraged and economical performance was being rewarded. The Grand National was breaking all of those rules as it rolled around as a semi-cloaked muscle car. Think about that. A Buick, your grandma's brand, dressed head to toe in black, turbocharged V6. The GNX, the final, baddest version, was quicker than almost anything else on the road at the time, reaching 60 miles per hour in 4.7 seconds. That made it even faster than a Ferrari Testarossa. A Buick, beating a Ferrari, in 1987, If that doesn't sum up Gen X's entire attitude toward the world, nothing does. You didn't need to be flashy. You just needed to show up and smoke everybody. And here's where it gets personal. You probably knew someone in high school who had one of these cars. Maybe you had one. And that car wasn't just transportation. It was your identity. The sound of your engine was your ringtone before ringtones existed. People heard you coming from 2 blocks away and knew exactly who it was. Going on a date in one of these? That was an event. You didn't pull up and text, "I'm here." You rolled up with the windows down and the exhaust note did the announcing. And your date's dad either respected you or wanted you gone. There was no in between. Now, there was a separate category of car love happening at the same time, and it lived on your wall. If you were an average kid of the 80s, there were 2 cars that you wanted more than any others. Posters of these street machines covered the bedroom walls of American teenage boys from coast to coast. One was the Lamborghini Countach. The Lamborghini Countach wasn't practical. It was nearly impossible to see out of, a challenge to park, and you basically had to be a contortionist to get in or out. Nobody cared. It was loud, wild, and utterly ridiculous, which made it the ultimate dream car. You never saw one in real life. Maybe you saw one at a car show, behind a rope, guarded like the Mona Lisa. Didn't matter. It lived on your wall and in your head. And that poster did more for your idea of what's possible than any guidance counselor ever did. Because here's the thing about those posters. They weren't just decoration. They were promises to yourself. Someday. You didn't know how, you didn't have a plan, but you looked at that wedge-shaped, scissor-door spaceship every morning and thought, "I'm going to make it." And that someday mentality, that's still running in the background. It never turned off. Which is why, 40 years later, when you're scrolling through Bring a Trailer at midnight and you see a clean 87 Grand National with 30,000 miles on it, your heart rate jumps. Not because you need a car, because you made a promise to a kid on a twin-size bed in 1986. And that kid is still waiting. Now, and this is something people almost never talk about. Gen X is not one group when it comes to cars. There's a split right down the middle. Older Gen X tends to have a fondness for big V8 power and the pre-Malaise era cars that could be had for cheap as first cars in high school. These are the folks who could still grab a used 71 Chevelle or a beat-up Dodge Dart with a slant 6 for a few $100 in the early 80s. They got the tail end of cheap muscle. They smelled leaded gas and lived to tell about it. Younger Gen X tends to have an interest in the European and Japanese cars that were coming to define high-tech, increasingly efficient motoring. One car enthusiast on a forum wrote, 1988 to 1991 Honda Civics and Acura Integras were the cars me and my friends wanted in high school in SoCal. If you were a spoiled kid, you were able to get your parents to buy you a CRX. So older Gen X was V8s and American Iron. Younger Gen X was turbo 4 cylinders and Japanese engineering. But here's what connected both sides. They both wanted to go fast. The method was different. The feeling was identical. Gen X was far more open to Japanese cars. They didn't care about the heritage. They cared about performance. The 1980s saw a huge uptick in technology, and Japan led the way. So then came the dawn of 250 horsepower cars that weighed just over 2,000 pounds. The math was simple. Light car plus good power equals huge grin. That's not a formula you learn in school. That's a formula you learn at a red light at 11 p.m. with your buddy in the next lane. Life happened. Careers, mortgages, kids, minivans. You traded the Fox Body for something, quote, practical, maybe a Camry, maybe an Explorer. You told yourself you'd come back to the fun car later, and later just kept getting pushed. 5 more years, 10 more years. The kids need braces. The roof needs replacing. But the whole time, that itch never went away. And now, the data shows you're finally scratching it. In 2023, Haggerty, the biggest name in classic car insurance, hit a milestone. Gen X enthusiasts finally passed boomers as the largest group seeking insurance quotes for enthusiast vehicles. That means your generation is now the biggest force in the collector car world. Not boomers, you. 80s retro is blowing up in the media right now, and while that is partly driven by Gen X creators, it also has them yearning for those sweet rides of their formative years. And the prices prove it. In 2024, muscle cars from the traditional 1964 to 72 era made up 5.3% of all cars sold at auction, but accounted for $273 million in total sales. The average price per muscle car? $78,000, compared to $61,000 overall. And those 80s cars you actually drove? They're climbing too. The rise in value for rides like the Fox Body Mustang, or IROC-Z, can be explained as simply as the same Gen Xers who drove these cars back in the day now want a piece of their youth back. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't just about nostalgia. It's about unfinished business. You didn't buy that Countach at 17 because you couldn't. You didn't keep the Fox Body at 25 because life said no. And every time you see one now, your brain doesn't say, "Oh, cool car." Your brain says, "That was supposed to be mine." That's the psychology. It's not about the car. It's about the version of yourself that had to let it go. And now, you've got a house. You've got a career. The kids might even be out. And that 17-year-old inside you is banging on the door going, "It's time. You promised." And if you think this is just a private obsession, think again. It's become a full-blown public debate. In March 2025, a guy named Dale Stark posted on X, "My buddy into classic muscle cars says the market's crashing as boomers age out. Gen X rarely, and millennials/Gen Z almost never want to pay big for a 60s clunker." Some of the Gen Z crowd took issue with the idea that they weren't interested in muscle cars. Even the millennials got in on the debate. One millennial replied, "Millennials don't have the money or financial security. We'd love to have cool stuff, but we have to buy a beater and do the restorations ourselves." But here's what you, Gen X, already knew long before that tweet. There was a generation who got hooked on cheap, used muscle cars in the 70s and 80s before they became sought-after classics. That was you. You were buying these things when nobody wanted them, when a 70s Chevelle was just a used car with bad gas mileage and no AC. You didn't pay $100 grand for a collectible. You paid $800 for something fast with a rusty quarter panel, and you loved every second of it. That's the difference between you and every generation that came after. You didn't discover these cars on Instagram. You discovered them with grease under your fingernails, at a gas station, at 17, on a Thursday night, with $3 in your pocket and a quarter tank of gas. So, there's one last thing. Every generation has a thing. Boomers had Woodstock, millennials had the internet, Gen Z has whatever Gen Z has this week. You had the sound of an engine in a parking lot on a warm night in 1987. And the reason you still chase that sound, the reason a clean Fox body on a Bring a Trailer listing can ruin your whole afternoon, is because that sound was the first time you felt like you. Not someone's kid, not someone's student. You. Behind the wheel, in control, going somewhere. And that person? Still in there. Still has good taste. Go get the car. What was your favorite car growing up? Let me know in the comments. I read and respond to everyone. If you like this video, hit the like and subscribe button below. We'd love to have you here. And check out this video next. I think you'll find it interesting. See you there.